My secret daughter joined the billionaire CEO's company. He never knew she was his child. The blue glow of computer screens cast eerie shadows across the executive office as the clock on the wall ticked past 2 a.m. James Hawthorne, billionaire CEO of Hawthorne Tech, ran his hand through his silver-streaked hair, his eyes burning from 20 straight hours of staring at code. "We're running out of time," he said, voice tight with controlled panic. "If we don't fix this bug before the Asian markets open, the entire Nexus launch collapses." Beside him, Emily Thompson nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I think I see the problem. The adaptive learning protocol is rejecting the new parameters because it's reading them as security threats." Their shoulders nearly touched as they hunched over the same screen. This unlikely pair, the legendary tech titan and the brilliant new hire who'd been at the company less than a month. Neither aware that the crisis bringing them together tonight was nothing compared to the truth that connected them by blood. Have you ever wondered if fate has a sense of humor? How the universe sometimes brings together what was once torn apart, creating moments where past and present collide in ways no one could have predicted. Tonight, in this high-stakes moment, a secret kept for 25 years is about to unravel. A daughter who never knew her father, a father who never knew he had a child. And between them, a small golden locket containing a truth that will change everything. What would you do if you discovered that the person working beside you, someone you've just met but inexplicably connected with, is actually the family you never knew existed? Stay with me to witness an extraordinary journey of discovery, forgiveness, and the true meaning of legacy. Hello, my beautiful sisters. Life has a way of bringing us full circle, doesn't it? Those moments when the past we thought we'd carefully packed away suddenly reappears, demanding to be acknowledged. So many of us have lived with secrets, some we've kept, others kept from us. We've wondered about roads not taken, connections severed, and the what-ifs that haunt quiet moments. But what I've learned in my journey is that it's never too late for truth to emerge, for healing to begin, for new chapters to be written. Whatever unfinished business lies in your heart today, remember that courage doesn't mean having all the answers. It means being willing to face the questions. And sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings arise from the ashes of what we thought was long finished. The autumn sun slanted through the windows of Sarah Thompson's modest Chicago apartment as she carefully folded the last of her daughter's business clothes into the suitcase. Her hands, showing the first signs of arthritis that had ended her teaching career earlier than expected, smoothed over the crisp blouse with a touch of reverence. "Mom, I can pack my own things," Emily said, entering the bedroom with 2 mugs of tea. At 24, she stood tall and confident, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, intelligence shining in eyes that Sarah had always found hauntingly familiar. "I know you can," Sarah replied, accepting the steaming mug. "But humor your mother. It's not every day your only daughter moves across the country to work for one of the most prestigious tech companies in the world." Emily sat on the edge of the bed, watching her mother with a mixture of affection and concern. "Are you sure you'll be all right? With the treatments and everything?" "Don't you dare worry about me," Sarah said firmly. "Dr. Patel says the new medication is working wonders. Besides, this is your moment. Hawthorne Tech doesn't hire just anyone for their innovation team." What Sarah didn't say, what she had never said, was that Emily wasn't just going to work for any tech company. She was going to work for his company. For James Hawthorne, the brilliant, driven CEO who had walked out of Sarah's life 25 years ago, never knowing he had left behind more than a heartbroken college girlfriend, never knowing he had a daughter. "I still can't believe they chose me," Emily said, her voice tinged with the quiet confidence that had always defined her. Not arrogance, Sarah had raised her better than that, but the steady self-assurance of someone who knew her worth. "I can," Sarah replied, reaching out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "You've earned this, Em, every step of the way." As Emily launched into excited details about her new apartment in Palo Alto and the project she'd be working on, Sarah felt the familiar ache of her long-kept secret. She had made her choice all those years ago, to raise her daughter alone, to never tell James about the child they had created during that golden summer in Ann Arbor. He had been destined for greatness even then, his ambition burning so bright it sometimes scared her. When his family had orchestrated his transfer to Stanford, pulling him into their vision of his future, Sarah had discovered her pregnancy just weeks later. She had considered telling him, had even dialed his new number once, her hand trembling. But then she'd read about his first startup in a technology magazine, seen the determination in his eyes in the accompanying photo, and made her decision. James was already gone, racing toward the future he'd always wanted. A baby would have been an anchor he never asked for. So she had built a life for herself and Emily, teaching literature at the local high school, creating a home filled with books and ideas and unconditional love. She never spoke ill of Emily's father, simply saying he had been a brilliant young man whose path had diverged from hers before he knew about the pregnancy. "Mom, are you listening?" Emily's voice pulled her back to the present. "Sorry, sweetheart. Just getting sentimental in my old age," Sarah smiled, pushing away the memories. "I was saying that the head of the innovation department mentioned the CEO sometimes drops in on new projects. Can you imagine? Meeting James Hawthorne himself." Sarah's heart stuttered. "That would be quite something," she managed, turning away to hide the flash of panic in her eyes. "He's certainly accomplished remarkable things. The articles say he's intimidating but brilliant," Emily continued, oblivious to her mother's distress. "Apparently he can spot a flaw in code from across the room and remembers every detail of every project. Since his wife died, they say he's thrown himself completely into the company." Sarah had read those same articles, had followed James's rise from afar over the years. The brilliant Stanford graduate who launched his first successful company at 23. The visionary who transformed how people interacted with technology. The man who had married the daughter of a venture capitalist, only to lose her to cancer 5 years ago. The man who had never had other children. "Just be yourself," Sarah said, finding her composure. "Your ideas stand on their own merit." That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Sarah sat alone in her small living room, a worn photo album open on her lap. She rarely allowed herself this indulgence, this journey back to the summer that had changed everything. But tonight, with Emily about to enter James's world, she needed to remember. There they were, James and Sarah at 23, sitting on the steps of the university library. His arm was draped casually around her shoulders, his dark eyes alight with the intensity that always characterized him. She had been captivated by his mind, the way he could envision technological possibilities others couldn't even imagine. He had been drawn to her thoughtfulness, her love of literature, the way she challenged his pragmatic worldview with questions of ethics and humanity. For one perfect summer, they had been inseparable. Until the day his father had arrived unannounced, with news of the Stanford transfer and the connections that would launch James's career. Sarah had seen the hunger in James's eyes, even as he promised they would make it work long distance. 2 weeks later, his calls became less frequent. A month after that, they stopped altogether. Sarah closed the album, her decision made. She would not tell Emily the truth, not yet. Her daughter deserved to make her own impression at Hawthorne Tech, to succeed or fail on her own merits. If fate brought her face to face with her father, Sarah would deal with that when it happened. For now, she would do what she had always done. Trust in the remarkable young woman she had raised, and hope that the past would stay where it belonged. If you've ever wondered about the power of fate to bring people together, hit that like button and share this with someone who believes in second chances. The Hawthorne Tech campus sprawled across 30 acres of prime Silicon Valley real estate, a collection of sleek glass buildings surrounded by carefully landscaped gardens and outdoor workspaces. Emily stood at the entrance, her visitor badge clipped to her blazer, taking a moment to absorb the reality of her new workplace. "Intimidating, isn't it?" said a voice beside her. Emily turned to find a woman about her age, with bright red hair and a friendly smile. "That obvious, huh?" Emily laughed. "I'm Zoe Chun, UX design team," the woman said, extending her hand. "And trust me, everyone feels that way on their first day, even the geniuses." "Emily Thompson, new to the innovation department," she replied, grateful for the friendly face. "And definitely not a genius. Innovation? Impressive," Zoe whistled. That's Hawthorne's pet division. He handpicks everyone who works there. He? You mean James Hawthorne himself? The one and only, Zoe confirmed as they walked toward the main building. Most employees go years without seeing him in person, but innovation gets the full Hawthorne experience. He's brilliant but intense. Sets impossible standards. Great, Emily murmured. No pressure. You'll be fine, Zoe assured her. Just don't take it personally if he tears your work apart. It's his love language. After getting her permanent badge and completing orientation, Emily was escorted to the innovation department on the top floor of the main building. The space was open and airy, with glass-walled meeting rooms around the perimeter and clusters of workstations in the center. Her team lead, Daniel Abrams, greeted her with a firm handshake. Welcome aboard, Emily. Your work at Northwestern caught our attention, particularly your thesis on adaptive learning algorithms. We're hoping you'll bring that fresh perspective to Project Nexus. I'm excited to dive in, she replied, trying to project confidence despite the butterflies in her stomach. Good, because we present to Hawthorne in 3 days, and your input will be part of it. Emily's eyes widened. 3 days? I thought I'd have more time to get up to speed. Daniel's smile was sympathetic but unyielding. Welcome to innovation. The learning curve is a vertical line here. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of code reviews, project documentation, and intense discussions with her new teammates. Project Nexus, she learned, was Hawthorne Tech's most ambitious undertaking yet. An integrated platform that would revolutionize how educational institutions delivered personalized learning experiences. The concept resonated deeply with Emily, whose mother had dedicated her life to education. On the morning of the presentation, Emily arrived early, reviewing her notes one last time. She had identified several potential improvements to the algorithm's responsiveness and had worked through the night to create a demonstration. Ready for the Hawthorne experience? Daniel asked, finding her at her desk. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, gathering her tablet. One piece of advice, he said, his voice lowering. Hawthorne respects people who stand their ground. If you believe in your ideas, don't back down, even if he pushes. The conference room filled quickly with department heads and project leads. Emily took a seat toward the back, trying to calm her racing heart. At precisely 9 a.m., the room fell silent as the door opened. James Hawthorne entered without fanfare, no assistant, no entourage. At 48, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and fine lines around his eyes spoke of years of intense focus. He wore a simple charcoal suit with no tie, the uniform of a man who had transcended the need for power dressing. Let's not waste time, he said, taking a seat at the head of the table. Show me where we stand. As Daniel began the presentation, Emily found herself studying the legendary CEO. There was something oddly familiar about him, perhaps from the many articles and interviews she'd read. Yet it felt more personal, like a half-remembered dream. The presentation progressed smoothly until they reached the section on the adaptive learning algorithm, Emily's area of focus. The current iteration shows a 62% improvement in personalization, Daniel explained, displaying the test results. Not good enough, Hawthorne interrupted, his voice calm but unyielding. The educational gap doesn't need incremental improvements. It needs transformation. What's holding us back? Daniel hesitated, and Emily felt a surge of courage. This was exactly what she had been working on. If I may, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. All eyes turned to her, including Hawthorne's penetrating gaze. I believe the algorithm is overweighting historical performance and undervaluing learning style adaptability. Hawthorne's eyebrow raised slightly. Explain. Taking a deep breath, Emily stood and moved to the presentation screen. May I? She asked Daniel, who nodded, looking both surprised and intrigued. She pulled up her demonstration, aware of Hawthorne's intense focus. The current model assumes learning patterns remain relatively stable, but my research suggests they're highly contextual and fluid. If we implement this modified approach, She tapped her tablet, displaying her code. "We can achieve much more responsive personalization." The room was silent as Hawthorne studied her work, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He stood and walked to the screen, examining her code more closely. "You're suggesting we essentially allow the algorithm to question its own assumptions in real time," he said, not looking at her. "Yes," Emily confirmed. "Traditional models are too rigid. Learning isn't linear, it's organic, responsive to countless variables. Our technology should reflect that reality." Hawthorne turned to face her, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes. A flash of recognition quickly masked. "What's your name?" "Emily Thompson, sir. I just started this week." "Thompson," he repeated, as if testing the sound. "Where did you study?" "Northwestern. Computer science and business." He nodded slowly. "Your approach is unconventional. It will require significant reworking of the foundation we've built." Emily felt her heart sink, but remembered Daniel's advice. "With respect, Mr. Hawthorne, foundations are meant to support what's built on them, not limit it. If the foundation isn't serving the vision, perhaps it's the foundation that needs to change." A murmur ran through the room. No one spoke to James Hawthorne that way, especially not a new hire in her first week. But instead of the expected rebuke, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Implement your changes," he said after a long moment. "You have 2 weeks to prove your theory. If it works, we'll rebuild the foundation. If not," he left the consequence unspoken. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." As the meeting concluded, Emily felt both exhilarated and terrified. She had just committed to delivering a major overhaul in 2 weeks, and had challenged the CEO of Hawthorne Tech in her first official meeting. What she didn't see was James Hawthorne pausing at the door, looking back at her with a puzzled expression. Something about the young woman nagged at him, her confidence, the particular way she tilted her head when considering a problem, the familiar spark of stubborn determination in her eyes. "Daniel," he called to the team lead, "send me Thompson's complete file. I want to know more about our newest innovator." That evening, James sat alone in his minimalist penthouse overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The lights of the city twinkled below, but his attention was fixed on the tablet in his hand, displaying Emily Thompson's employee file. Her credentials were impressive. Graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, innovative thesis work, glowing recommendations. But it was her birth date that had stopped him cold. February 15th, 2002. 9 months after that summer in Ann Arbor with Sarah. "It's a coincidence," he muttered to himself, setting down the tablet and reaching for his whiskey. Nothing more. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that had gripped him in that conference room, the strange sense of familiarity, of connection. He pulled up her photo again, studying her features more carefully. The shape of her eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the way her brow furrowed slightly in her ID photo, all struck chords of recognition. But it was impossible. Sarah would have told him if she'd been pregnant. Wouldn't she? His mind traveled back to those final weeks in Ann Arbor, to the growing distance he'd allowed to form between them as Stanford and his future beckoned. His father had been relentless, orchestrating the transfer, introducing him to the Silicon Valley connections that would later prove invaluable. And James, ambitious to his core, had let Sarah fade from his life. First with less frequent calls, then with silence. He had told himself it was kinder that way, a clean break. They had been moving in different directions. He toward the tech empire he would build. She toward the quiet academic life she had always wanted. By the time he'd achieved his first major success, thoughts of Sarah had been carefully packed away, a youthful chapter closed. Until today, when a young woman with familiar eyes had stood her ground in his conference room, challenging him with the same quiet intensity Sarah had once shown. James reached for his phone, then set it down again. What would he even say? "Hello, Sarah. It's the man who walked out of your life 25 years ago. By any chance, did I father your daughter?" The absurdity of it struck him, yet the question burned. He opened his laptop and did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for Sarah Thompson. The results were sparse. a mention in the Chicago Public Schools newsletter upon her early retirement due to health concerns, a few academic publications from years earlier, a photo from a community fundraiser for medical research. The photo made him pause. Sarah at perhaps 45, her hair shorter than he remembered but her smile unchanged, standing beside a young woman who could only be Emily. The resemblance between mother and daughter was clear, but as he studied the image, James felt a chill of recognition. Emily had his mother's cheekbones, his own serious expression. "This is insane," he muttered, closing the laptop. He was seeing connections where none existed, creating a narrative from coincidence and middle-aged regret. Yet as he moved to his bedroom, his gaze fell on one of the few personal items in his otherwise austere home, a framed photo of himself with his late wife, Eleanor. They had been happy in their way, built on mutual respect and shared ambition rather than passionate love. Her death from cancer 5 years ago had left him alone with his company, the only legacy he had ever truly invested in. They had never had children. Eleanor's cancer treatment had made that impossible, and afterward, neither had felt the absence keenly enough to pursue alternatives. Now, staring at her image, James wondered if she had sensed what he had only recently acknowledged to himself, that some essential piece of his humanity had been left behind in that summer with Sarah. Sleep eluded him that night, his mind racing with possibilities and doubts. By morning, he had convinced himself that his suspicions were merely the product of loneliness and regret, until he walked into his office and found a company-wide email announcing the annual archive digitization project. All departments are encouraged to contribute historical materials for the company's digital museum. The email read, "Photos, early product designs, press clippings, anything that tells the Hawthorne Tech story." James stared at the screen, an idea forming. If Emily Thompson was indeed his daughter, perhaps the archives would yield some connection, some proof beyond his intuition. Over the next 2 weeks, James found himself creating reasons to observe Emily's work. He scheduled additional progress reviews for Project Nexus, dropped by team meetings unannounced, and even arranged to have lunch in the same executive dining room when he knew she would be there with her team. Each encounter only deepened his suspicion. It wasn't just her appearance. Though the resemblance to his mother grew more striking the more he looked, it was her mind. Emily approached problems with the same methodical creativity he recognized in himself, breaking down complex issues into elegant solutions that others overlooked. "The algorithm modifications are exceeding expectations," Daniel reported during their weekly executive briefing. "Thompson's approach has increased personalization metrics by 87%. We've never seen adaptation rates like this." "And the stability issues?" James asked, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the pride that inexplicably swelled in his chest. "She solved them, created a self-correcting protocol that actually strengthens with each apparent failure. It's the kind of thinking that built this company." James nodded, careful not to show undue interest. "Keep me updated, and make sure Thompson has whatever resources she needs." Meanwhile, Emily was thriving in her new role, unaware of the CEO's growing preoccupation with her. The challenge of reimagining Project Nexus energized her, and she found herself working late into the evenings, driven by the same perfectionism that had defined her academic career. "You know, normal people go home before midnight," Zoe commented one evening, finding Emily still at her desk when most of the building had emptied. Emily laughed. "Just finishing up some simulations. The adaptive protocol is showing promising results, but I want to stress test it against more diverse learning patterns." "All work and no play," Zoe warned, perching on the edge of Emily's desk. "At least tell me you're coming to the company anniversary party next week. 20 years of Hawthorne Tech deserves a celebration, and you deserve a break." "I'll think about it," Emily promised, though her mind was already drifting back to the code on her screen. What she didn't know was that the anniversary celebration would include a special exhibition of company archives, including photos from James Hawthorne's early career that might hold the key to confirming his growing suspicions. Have you ever felt an unexplainable connection with someone you just met? Comment below with your own story of mysterious bonds that can't be explained by logic alone. The summer of 2001 had been unusually warm in Ann Arbor. The university campus hummed with the energy of summer sessions and research projects. A quieter rhythm than the regular academic year, but vibrant in its own way. Sarah Thompson sat cross-legged on the grass outside the literature building, lost in Austen's Persuasion, when a shadow fell across her page. You know, there are studies suggesting that reading physical books activates different neural pathways than digital text, said a voice above her. The tactile experience creates stronger memory imprints. She looked up, squinting against the sun, to find a tall young man with intense dark eyes and an expression that hovered between confidence and curiosity. Are you suggesting I switch to an e-reader for a suboptimal neural experience? She asked, marking her place with a finger. He laughed, the sound warming something in her she hadn't realized was cold. Quite the opposite. I'm admiring your commitment to cognitive optimization. That's a very technical way of saying, I like books, Sarah observed, but she was smiling now. James Hawthorne, he said, extending his hand. Software engineering. Sarah Thompson, English literature. And since you've interrupted Jane Austen, you owe me a coffee at minimum. That coffee had turned into dinner, which became a weekend exploring the art museums in Detroit, which blossomed into the most transformative summer of Sarah's life. James was brilliant, driven, sometimes frustratingly logical, but with an underlying passion that surfaced when he talked about technology's potential to change lives. Imagine educational software that actually adapts to how each child learns. He told her one night as they lay on a blanket watching stars appear over the Huron River. Not just adjusting difficulty levels, but fundamentally reshaping itself to match cognitive patterns. We could revolutionize access to quality education. The great equalizer, Sarah had murmured, her head on his chest. Technology with humanity at its core. Exactly. He kissed the top of her head. That's why I need you, Sarah. You keep me anchored to the human impact. It's easy to get lost in the code and forget the people it's meant to serve. For those golden months, they had been perfect complements. His vision and her empathy, his ambition and her groundedness, creating a balance that made both of them better. Until the day Richard Hawthorne arrived in his tailored suit and luxury car, with news of the Stanford transfer and the Silicon Valley connections that would launch his son's career. This is the opportunity you've been working toward. His father had insisted over dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Ann Arbor. Bradford Mills himself wants to mentor you. Do you understand what that means? The doors this will open. Sarah had watched James's expression as he absorbed the news, seen the hunger in his eyes even as he reached for her hand under the table. We'll make it work, he'd promised later that night. Stanford to Michigan isn't so far. We'll visit, call every day. But she had known even then, had seen the future unfolding with crystal clarity. James Hawthorne was destined for a world that moved too fast for long-distance romance, for a life where sentiment would inevitably be sacrificed to ambition. 2 weeks after he left, his calls became less frequent, his voice more distant when they did connect. A month later, they stopped altogether, and 2 weeks after that, Sarah sat in a clinic in Ann Arbor, staring at a positive pregnancy test, her world simultaneously expanding and contracting in the space of a heartbeat. In the present day, Emily found herself drawn to the company archives display at the anniversary celebration. The grand ballroom of the San Francisco Four Seasons had been transformed for the event, with different stations showcasing Hawthorne Tech's evolution over 2 decades. Most employees gravitated toward the open bar or the interactive displays of future products, but Emily was curious about the company's origins. Interested in ancient history? A voice asked as she studied a display case containing early prototypes and press clippings. Emily turned to find James Hawthorne himself standing beside her, looking less formidable in evening attire than he did in the boardroom. I believe in understanding foundations before trying to change them, she replied with a small smile, referencing their first meeting. Touché, Ms. Thompson. He gestured toward the display. Any particular aspect of our humble beginnings that interests you? Actually, yes. Project Nexus seems like a return to your original vision. These early interviews all mention educational access and personalized learning, but somewhere along the way, The company shifted toward enterprise solutions and consumer tech. James looked surprised. "You've done your homework. I like to know the why behind the what," Emily explained. "It helps me understand the purpose I'm serving." "The why got diluted by practical realities," he admitted, his expression thoughtful. "Venture capital, market demands, quarterly growth expectations. The educational vision was always there, but it became a side project rather than our core mission." "Until now," Emily observed. "Until now," he agreed. "Perhaps it took 20 years to build the foundation strong enough to support the original dream." They moved together through the exhibition, James occasionally offering context for various artifacts. Emily found herself unexpectedly comfortable in his presence. The intimidating CEO replaced by a passionate innovator whose vision resonated with her own values. They paused before a wall of photographs documenting the company's early days. James in his 20s, surrounded by the first Hawthorne tech team in a cramped office space. James shaking hands with investors. James at the NASDAQ bell ringing. And then, partially obscured in a group shot from what appeared to be a university event, a young woman with a familiar smile, her arm linked with James's. Emily leaned closer, something tugging at her memory. The woman looked remarkably like "My mother?" she whispered, too softly for James to hear, but he had noticed her sudden stillness. "Something interesting?" Emily straightened quickly, just surprised by how young everyone looks. It's easy to forget that tech titans were once just students with big ideas. James studied her for a moment, sensing there was more to her reaction, but before he could press further, they were interrupted by the CFO needing his attention for an important investor. "Excuse me, Miss Thompson, duty calls." He hesitated, then added, "Your work on Project Nexus is exceptional. I look forward to seeing where you take it next." As he walked away, Emily turned back to the photograph, her heart racing. The woman in the picture was undeniably her mother, younger, with longer hair, but unmistakably Sarah Thompson, which meant that her mother had known James Hawthorne, had been close to him, judging by their body language in the photo. Why had her mother never mentioned this? In all the discussions about Hawthorne Tech and Emily's new job, Sarah had never once indicated she had any personal connection to the company's founder, unless the thought that formed in Emily's mind was so shocking, so impossible, that she physically stepped back from the display. No, couldn't be. Her mother would have told her something that significant. Wouldn't she? Emily's hand went instinctively to the locket she wore beneath her dress. A gift from her mother on her 18th birthday. Inside was a tiny photo, so worn its details were barely discernible, of the father she had never known. Sarah had given it to her with tears in her eyes, saying only that he had been a brilliant, ambitious young man whose path had diverged from hers before he knew about the pregnancy. With trembling fingers, Emily slipped away from the crowded ballroom to find a quiet corner. She opened the locket, studying the faded image inside, then looked back toward the exhibition where the younger version of James Hawthorne smiled from dozens of photographs. The resemblance was unmistakable. "It can't be," she whispered to herself. "It just can't be." But even as she denied it, pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. Her birthday in February 2002, 9 months after her mother would have known James in Michigan. The familiar feeling she'd had upon meeting him. The way he'd looked at her sometimes, as if trying to place a memory. Emily closed the locket with a snap, her mind reeling. What should she do with this suspicion? Confront her mother? Ask James directly? Pretend she'd never seen the photograph? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Daniel. Critical bug discovered in Nexus integration. All hands emergency meeting in 30 minutes. The professional crisis provided a welcome distraction from her personal one. Emily took a deep breath, tucked the locket back beneath her dress, and headed for the exit. Whatever the truth about her parentage, it had waited 24 years. Could wait a few hours more while she did her job. What she didn't know was that James Hawthorne had seen her reaction to the photograph, had watched her touch something beneath her dress with a look of shock on her face, and had made the decision, after 2 weeks of suspicion and research, to finally uncover the truth. whatever it might be. The emergency with Project Nexus would bring them together in his office at 2 a.m., creating the perfect storm for secrets long buried to finally surface. The Hawthorne Tech headquarters stood like a beacon against the night sky, most floors dark except for the executive level where emergency lights blazed. Emily hurried through the deserted lobby, her evening gown exchanged for jeans and a sweater, her mind still spinning between professional crisis and personal revelation. The elevator opened directly into the executive suite, where Daniel and 3 other team members were already gathered around a conference table littered with tablets and coffee cups. "What happened?" Emily asked, dropping her bag and joining them. Daniel looked up, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Integration test failed catastrophically. The adaptive protocol is rejecting the security parameters, treating them as hostile intrusions. If we don't fix it before the Asian markets open and the first educational partners come online, the entire platform crashes," Emily finished, already reaching for a tablet. "Show me the error logs." For the next hour, the team worked frantically, tracing the bug through layers of complex code. The adaptive learning algorithm Emily had designed was functioning perfectly in isolation, but something in the integration process was triggering a defensive response. "It's like the system is too intelligent for its own good," one of the engineers muttered. "It's protecting itself from what it perceives as a threat." That's exactly what's happening, Emily realized, a solution beginning to form in her mind. "We need to introduce the security protocols gradually, like a vaccine, small, controlled exposures that teach the system these are protective measures, not attacks." "That would require rewriting the entire integration sequence," Daniel objected. "We don't have time. We don't have a choice," came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see James Hawthorne standing there, jacket discarded, tie loosened, looking every bit as focused as he had during the anniversary celebration, but now with an edge of controlled urgency. "Mr. Hawthorne," Daniel began, "we were just discussing. I heard. Ms. Thompson's approach is correct. The system needs to be taught, not forced." James moved to the main display screen. "Show me what you've got so far." For the next hour, James worked alongside the team, his legendary coding skills on full display as he helped implement Emily's solution. They fell into an unexpected rhythm, anticipating each other's thoughts, building on each other's ideas with an efficiency that left the rest of the team exchanging glances. By 1:30 a.m., they had a working prototype ready for testing. "Run the simulation," James instructed, and the room fell silent as the system processed the new integration approach. Green lights flickered across the screen as each module accepted the security protocols without resistance. The final integration completed successfully, and a collective sigh of relief filled the room. "It worked," Daniel said, the tension visibly draining from his shoulders. "We're stable. Implement it across all servers," James directed. "I want confirmation when the Asian markets come online without issues." As the team dispersed to execute the final steps, James turned to Emily. "I'd like a word in my office, Ms. Thompson, to discuss your contribution to tonight's solution." Emily followed him down the hallway, her professional pride warring with the personal questions that had been pushed aside during the crisis but now came rushing back. His office was exactly as she'd imagined it. Minimalist, meticulous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sleeping city. "Your insight saved us tonight," James said, closing the door behind them. The vaccine analogy was brilliant, teaching rather than forcing. It's the kind of human-centered thinking that technology often lacks. "Thank you," Emily replied, trying to focus on the professional compliment rather than the way her heart was pounding. "It's something my mother always emphasized in her teaching, that learning can't be forced, only facilitated." "Your mother?" James repeated, his tone shifting subtly. "She's a teacher?" "Was. She retired early due to health issues. She taught high school English in Chicago for over 20 years. James moved to his desk, his back to her for a moment as he seemed to gather his thoughts. When he turned, his expression had changed, becoming more personal, less the CEO and more the man. "Emily, I saw your reaction to the photograph in the exhibition tonight. The one from the University of Michigan. Her breath caught. I was just surprised to see a familiar face. Sarah Thompson, he said quietly. That was your mother in the photo, wasn't it? The direct question left no room for evasion. Yes, Emily admitted. Though I don't understand why she never mentioned knowing you. James's gaze was intense, searching. When is your birthday, Emily? February 15th, 2002, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. 9 months after that summer in Ann Arbor. 9 months after Sarah and I were together. The room seemed to tilt slightly as Emily processed his words. The suspicion that had formed earlier was now being spoken aloud, making it real in a way she wasn't prepared for. Are you saying? She began, unable to complete the question. I'm saying that I've had questions since the day we met, James replied, his composure slipping to reveal genuine emotion. Something about you felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Your mannerisms, your way of thinking, even the way you tilt your head when considering a problem. It's exactly like my mother used to do. Emily's hand went unconsciously to the locket around her neck, the weight of it suddenly significant. James noticed the gesture. What is that? He asked softly. With trembling fingers, Emily pulled the locket from beneath her sweater. My mother gave it to me on my 18th birthday. She said it contained a picture of my father, but that he'd left before I was born, that their paths had diverged. May I? James asked, his own hand not entirely steady as he reached toward the locket. Emily hesitated, then unclasped the chain and handed it to him. This moment felt monumental, as if her entire life hung in the balance of what would happen next. James opened the small golden heart carefully. Inside was a faded photograph, worn from years of being carried close to the heart. Despite its age, the image was unmistakable. A younger version of himself, smiling at the camera with the confidence of youth, unaware of what the future held. Oh my God, he whispered, looking up at Emily with eyes that suddenly seemed to mirror her own. It's true. You're my daughter. The words hung in the air between them, irrevocable and transformative. Emily felt tears forming. A lifetime of questions suddenly answered and 1,000 new ones taking their place. Why didn't she tell you? She asked, her voice breaking. Why didn't she tell me? James closed the locket gently, holding it in his palm as if it were infinitely precious. I left for Stanford that August. My father had arranged the transfer, set up connections with venture capitalists who would later fund my first company. I promised Sarah we'd make the long-distance relationship work, but you didn't, Emily finished, a lifetime of wondering about her absent father crystallizing into this moment. I got caught up in the momentum of building my future. The calls became less frequent, and eventually I just stopped. The admission clearly pained him. By the time I launched my first startup, I'd convinced myself it had been the right decision. That Sarah and I were on different paths. I never knew. I never imagined. That she was pregnant, Emily said, the reality of it still sinking in. That you had a daughter. James nodded, his expression haunted. She must have found out after I was already gone. After I'd made it clear through my actions that my ambitions came first. She tried to call you once, Emily revealed, remembering her mother's rare confessions about the past. She said she had your number in her hand, but then she saw an article about your first company. She decided not to be the one who held you back from the future you wanted. She should have told me, James said, a flash of anger breaking through his shock. I had a right to know, and I had a right to a father, Emily countered, her own emotions surging. But we can't change the past. We can only decide what to do now. The truth of her words seemed to reach him. James looked down at the locket in his hand, then carefully returned it to her. You're right. The question is where we go from here. Emily reclaimed the locket, fastening it around her neck once more. I don't know. This is overwhelming. I need time to process it. Of course, James agreed, visibly trying to respect her space despite the magnitude of their discovery. But there's one thing I need to do immediately. What's that? I need to talk to Sarah. His expression was resolute. After 25 years, we have a conversation long overdue. Emily felt a surge of protectiveness toward her mother. She's not well. The treatments for her arthritis are helping, but she tires easily. And this would be a shock. I understand, James said, his tone softening. But some truths can't remain buried, Emily. Not anymore. Before she could respond, Daniel knocked on the office door. Mr. Hawthorne? Asian markets are online. The system is stable. We did it. Thank you, Daniel. Excellent work tonight, all of you. James maintained his professional demeanor despite the personal earthquake that had just occurred. Get some rest. We'll reconvene tomorrow afternoon. After Daniel left, the silence between father and daughter grew heavy with unspoken questions and emotions. I should go, Emily finally said, needing space to absorb everything that had happened. Emily, James called as she reached the door. Whatever happens next, I want you to know something. Seeing the person you've become, your brilliance, your integrity, your compassion, makes me incredibly proud. Sarah did an amazing job raising you. The simple truth of his words brought fresh tears to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, and then she was gone, leaving James Hawthorne alone in his office with the knowledge that the legacy he'd spent his life building was nothing compared to the one he'd never known he had. If this moment of truth touched your heart, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that remind us it's never too late for healing and new beginnings. The following morning, Emily sat in her apartment, a cup of tea growing cold beside her as she stared at her phone. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the revelation over and over. James Hawthorne was her father, the brilliant, driven CEO she had admired from afar, whose company she had dreamed of working for, whose vision had inspired her own career path, was her biological father. And her mother had kept this secret for 24 years. With a deep breath, Emily dialed the familiar number. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice warm with maternal love. Emily, I was just thinking about you. How's the project going? Mom, Emily said, her voice catching. We need to talk. About James Hawthorne. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. What about him? Sarah finally asked, her tone carefully neutral. I saw a photograph at the company anniversary party. From the University of Michigan. You were in it with him. Emily paused, then added softly, I know, Mom. I know he's my father. She heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, followed by a shaky exhale. How did you find out? The photograph made me suspicious. Then we talked last night during a work crisis. I showed him the locket, Mom. The one with his picture. Oh, Emily, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I never meant for you to find out this way. Did you mean for me to find out at all? Emily couldn't keep the hurt from her voice. Were you ever going to tell me that the CEO of the company I work for is my biological father? I didn't know what to do when you got the job offer, Sarah admitted. I was shocked, then worried. Then, I told myself it was a sign that maybe the truth would find its own way out. But I was afraid, Emily. Afraid of disrupting your life. Afraid of facing James after all these years. He wants to talk to you, Emily said. He's in shock, Mom. But he also seems regretful. About the past. About not knowing about me. I should have told him, Sarah acknowledged, the weight of 25 years of secrecy evident in her voice. I convinced myself I was being selfless, not burdening him with a responsibility he hadn't asked for. But maybe part of me was just afraid of being rejected again, of hearing him say he didn't want this child we'd created. You don't know that's what would have happened, Emily pointed out gently. No, I don't. And that uncertainty has haunted me more than I've ever admitted. Sarah paused. Is he angry? He was briefly, but mostly he seems sad. For all the years he missed. Emily hesitated, then asked the question that had kept her awake all night. Do you want to see him, Mom? After all this time, the silence stretched between them, filled with a quarter-century of unspoken words and buried emotions. "Yes," Sarah finally answered. "I think it's time we both stopped hiding from the past." Meanwhile, in his penthouse overlooking the bay, James Hawthorne was making a decision that would reshape his life and his company. After a sleepless night reviewing old photographs and memories, he had called an emergency meeting with his executive team. Effective immediately, "I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations," he announced to their shocked expressions. "Diane will assume the role of acting CEO while I take a personal leave of absence." "James, what's going on?" asked Bradford Mills, his oldest friend and the company's CFO. "Is this about the Nexus crisis? Because that's been resolved." "It's about priorities," James replied simply. "For 20 years, I've put this company above everything else in my life. I've missed more than I realized. It's time to rectify that." He offered no further explanation, ignoring the concerned glances exchanged around the table. His personal life had always been exactly that, personal. Even after Eleanor's death, he had grieved privately, returning to work with redoubled focus rather than allowing himself to process the loss. But this was different. This wasn't about loss but discovery. A daughter, a brilliant young woman with her mother's compassion and his own drive. A family he never knew he had. After the meeting, Bradford followed him back to his office. "James, we've known each other since Stanford. Something major is happening. Talk to me." James hesitated, then decided that if he was truly changing his approach to life, it should start now. "I have a daughter, Brad. A 24-year-old daughter I just discovered last night." Bradford's jaw literally dropped. "What? How is that possible?" "Sarah Thompson. The summer before Stanford. She never told me she was pregnant." James ran a hand through his hair, still processing it himself. "Emily Thompson, our new hire in innovation. She's my daughter. The one who saved Project Nexus? That's your daughter." Bradford sank into a chair, stunned. "My God, James, this is incredible." "It's overwhelming," James admitted. 24 years of her life that I missed. 24 years of not knowing I was a father. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to Chicago, to see Sarah, to understand why she kept this secret, and to figure out where we go from here." James looked out at the city below, the empire he had built that suddenly seemed less significant than it had just 24 hours ago. "I've spent my life creating technology to connect people, Brad, but I've been disconnected from what matters most." 3 days later, James stood outside a modest apartment building in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. A bouquet of lilies, Sarah's favorite, he remembered, in his hand. The gesture felt simultaneously inadequate and too presumptuous, but he couldn't arrive empty-handed. Emily met him at the entrance, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "She's nervous," she warned him. "The treatments make her tired. So please." "I understand," James assured her. "I'm not here to upset her. I just want to talk." Emily nodded, then led him upstairs to the apartment where she had grown up. The space was warm and inviting, walls lined with bookshelves, framed photographs documenting Emily's childhood and achievements. James paused before one showing a young Emily, perhaps 7 or 8, holding a science fair ribbon. "First place," Emily explained, following his gaze, "for a project on how different types of music affect plant growth. The scientific method with an artistic twist," James observed. "Bridging disciplines even then. Mom always encouraged that. She said the most interesting discoveries happen at the intersection of different ways of thinking." Before James could respond, a voice came from the doorway to the living room. "She gets that perspective from you, actually." Sarah Thompson stood there, thinner than he remembered, her hair now styled in a short bob that framed her face elegantly. Despite the signs of her health challenges, her eyes were the same, intelligent, kind, with that spark of quiet strength he had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Sarah," he said, her name feeling both familiar and strange on his lips after so long. "These are for you." He extended the lilies awkwardly. "You remembered," she said softly, accepting the flowers. "After all this time." Some things stay with you, James replied, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared history that transcended the years of separation. Emily glanced between them, witnessing the complex emotions passing between her parents. I'll put these in water, she offered, taking the lilies and retreating to the kitchen to give them a moment of privacy. Please, sit down, Sarah gestured to the living room sofa. The treatments make standing for too long difficult. James followed her into the cozy space, noting the well-worn armchair that clearly belonged to Sarah, positioned near the window with a reading lamp and small table beside it. He chose the sofa across from it, maintaining a respectful distance. You look well, he said, then immediately regretted the platitude. I mean, it's okay, Sarah smiled faintly. The new medication is helping. The worst of it is the fatigue. An awkward silence fell between them, 25 years of unspoken words creating a chasm neither knew how to bridge. Why didn't you tell me? James finally asked, the question that had consumed him since the night in his office. About Emily. About the pregnancy. Sarah's hands folded in her lap, her fingers working together in a nervous gesture he remembered from their college days. I almost did. Once. I had the phone in my hand, your number ready to dial. But then I saw that article in Tech Innovators magazine, your first major feature. You looked so determined, so focused on the future you were building. That wouldn't have changed if I'd known about my child, James countered, a hint of the old hurt surfacing. Wouldn't it? Sarah met his gaze directly. You were 23, James, on the verge of everything you'd ever wanted. Your father had orchestrated your perfect launch into the tech world. Would you really have welcomed news that tied you to a pregnant English major back in Michigan? The question hung between them, uncomfortable in its honesty. James wanted to protest, to insist he would have done the right thing, but the truth was more complicated. I don't know, he admitted finally. I'd like to think I would have stepped up, but I was selfish then, driven, single-minded. You still are, Sarah observed, but without judgment. It's what's made you successful. At what cost? James looked around the apartment, at the evidence of the life he'd missed. Emily's graduation photos, family holiday celebrations, the 1,000 small moments that had shaped his daughter's life. I built an empire while missing the most important thing in the world. Emily returned with the lilies arranged in a crystal vase, placing them on the coffee table between her parents. Mom's favorite flowers in Grandma's vase, she commented. Some kind of symbolic full circle. The observation broke some of the tension, drawing a genuine smile from Sarah. Emily has always had a gift for finding meaning in small details, like someone else I once knew. James looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, seeing now the perfect blend of Sarah's empathy and his own analytical mind. I see both of us in you, he told Emily. The best parts, I hope. Mom always said I got my stubbornness from my father, Emily replied with a hint of humor. Now I understand why she seemed both frustrated and proud of that trait. The three of them fell into conversation that gradually became less strained, sharing stories that began to fill in the vast gaps in their shared history. Emily described her childhood in Chicago, her growing interest in technology, her decision to pursue computer science despite her natural aptitude for literature as well. I wanted to build things that would last, she explained, to create tools that would help people learn and connect. I never knew that desire might be genetic. Project Nexus, James realized. It's essentially the vision I had back in college. Educational technology that adapts to individual needs. The vision you shared with me that summer, Sarah added quietly. By the river under the stars. You talked about technology as the great equalizer. You remembered that? James asked, surprised. I remembered everything, James. The simple honesty in her voice made his chest tighten. Those memories shaped how I raised our daughter. I wanted her to know that part of you, the idealist with the brilliant mind and compassionate vision, even if she couldn't know you personally. You never spoke badly of him, Emily confirmed, looking at her mother with new understanding. Even when I asked difficult questions as I got older, you always said my father was a good man whose path went in a different direction. Because it was true, Sarah said simply. I made my choice to keep the pregnancy a secret. I couldn't blame James for not being part of a life he didn't know existed. James felt humbled by her generosity of spirit, by the absence of bitterness he might have expected after so many years of single parenthood. I would have helped financially at minimum, he said. You shouldn't have had to struggle. We managed, Sarah replied with quiet dignity. My parents helped until they passed. I had a good career teaching. Emily earned scholarships. We had everything we needed. Except a complete family, James observed softly. We were complete in our own way, Emily interjected, loyal to the mother who had raised her. Different from other families, but not lacking in love. The conversation continued as afternoon faded into evening, the three of them ordering dinner and sharing a meal that felt both surreal and strangely natural. James observed the easy rapport between mother and daughter, the shorthand they had developed over years of being each other's primary family. He felt like an outsider looking in on a beautiful relationship he had no part in creating. I should go, he said finally, aware that Sarah was showing signs of fatigue despite her evident effort to hide it. My hotel isn't far. You're staying in Chicago for a while? Sarah asked, surprise evident in her voice. I've taken a leave of absence from day-to-day operations, James explained. For the first time in 20 years, I'm not rushing back to the office. I hoped we might have more conversations. If you're willing. The vulnerability in his request was unlike anything Emily had seen from the confident CEO she knew professionally. This version of James Hawthorne, uncertain, hopeful, reaching out across decades of absence, was a revelation. I'd like that, Sarah said after a moment. There's much more to say, and Emily deserves the chance to know her father, even at this late date. It's never too late for truth, Emily said, echoing words her mother had often repeated during her childhood. That's what you always taught me. As James prepared to leave, Emily walked him to the door while Sarah rested on the sofa. This is strange for all of us, she acknowledged quietly. But I'm glad you came. So am I, James replied. More than I can express. He hesitated, then asked, would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Just the two of us? I'd like to get to know my daughter without the pressure of everything else. Emily nodded. I'd like that too. There's a lot I want to ask you. I'll answer everything honestly, he promised. No more secrets. After James left, Emily returned to find her mother with tears streaming silently down her face. Mom? She asked, alarmed. Are you okay? I'm fine, Sarah assured her, wiping her cheeks. It's just seeing him with you, watching him look at you with such pride and wonder. It's what I imagined all those years ago, when I first found out I was pregnant, before reality set in. Emily sat beside her mother, taking her hand. Are you angry with him? For not trying harder to stay in touch back then? Sarah considered the question carefully. No, she said finally. We were so young, both chasing different dreams. And once I decided not to tell him about the pregnancy, well, that choice had consequences I accepted long ago. He wants to be part of our lives now, Emily observed. How do you feel about that? Cautiously optimistic, Sarah replied with a small smile. James Hawthorne has always been a force of nature, brilliant, determined, all-consuming. But he's also capable of great tenderness. I saw glimpses of that today in how he looks at you, in how carefully he approached me. He's not the same man who left you, Emily suggested. None of us are who we were 25 years ago, Sarah agreed. That's the beauty and the challenge of reconnection. We're meeting as the people we've become, not the people we once were. Over the next few weeks, a new pattern emerged. James extended his stay in Chicago indefinitely, renting a furnished apartment rather than remaining in a hotel. He spent time with Emily, getting to know his daughter through long conversations, shared meals, and even attending her book club discussion when she nervously invited him. You actually read Jane Austen? She asked incredulously as they walked out of the bookstore where the club had met to discuss Persuasion. Your mother introduced me to Austin that summer, James admitted. I was a typical engineering student, dismissive of impractical literature. Sarah made me read Pride and Prejudice as a condition of dating her. Emily laughed. That sounds like Mom. She opened my world beyond code and algorithms, James said, his expression softening with memory. Taught me that understanding human nature was as important as understanding technology. It's a lesson I lost sight of somewhere along the way. His relationship with Sarah evolved more cautiously. They met for coffee occasionally, sometimes with Emily present, sometimes alone. They spoke of the past with increasing honesty, of the present with growing comfort, but carefully avoided any discussion of the future. Meanwhile, James was quietly arranging for Sarah's medical care, ensuring she had access to the best specialists and treatments available. He did this through Emily, respecting Sarah's independence while still addressing a need he felt responsible for. She doesn't have to know it's coming from me, he told Emily when she hesitated to accept his help. But please let me do this. 24 years of child support and medical insurance I should have been providing. This barely begins to address that debt. It's not about debt, Emily countered. It's about family. And Mom is proud. She won't want charity. Then we won't call it charity, James replied. We'll call it what it is. A father ensuring his daughter's mother receives the care she deserves. The turning point came unexpectedly, during a quiet dinner at Sarah's apartment. Emily had cooked, insisting her mother rest, while James brought wine and dessert. The conversation had flowed easily, the three of them gradually becoming more comfortable in this new family configuration. As Emily cleared the dishes, James noticed Sarah wincing slightly as she shifted in her chair. Bad day? He asked quietly. The weather change, she explained. Barometric pressure affects the inflammation. Without comment, James moved to the sofa and arranged the pillows. Come sit here, he suggested. It's better for your back than the dining chair. The simple act of caregiving, offered without fuss or expectation, seemed to touch something in Sarah. As she settled onto the sofa, she looked up at James with an expression he couldn't quite read. You've changed, she observed. Have I? The James the first knew would have offered to buy me a new spine, not arrange pillows, she said with gentle humor. Solutions, not comfort, were your specialty. He smiled ruefully. Eleanor taught me about comfort during her illness. That sometimes presence matters more than problem solving. Your wife sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was, James agreed, sitting in the armchair across from her. We had a good partnership. Not the grand passion of youth, but a deep respect and genuine affection. I'm glad you weren't alone, Sarah said sincerely. I worried about that sometimes over the years. And you? James asked the question he'd been avoiding. Was there someone special after? A few relationships, Sarah acknowledged. Nothing that lasted. Between teaching, raising Emily, and my own writing, there wasn't much room for romance. And perhaps I set the bar rather high in my youth. The compliment, offered so casually, hung in the air between them. From the kitchen, Emily watched the exchange, witnessing a fragile new understanding forming between her parents. That night, as James prepared to leave, Sarah handed him a worn leather journal. I kept this during my pregnancy and Emily's first year, she explained. It might help fill in some of the gaps. James accepted the journal with reverence, understanding the magnitude of the trust being offered. Thank you, he said simply, for this, for raising our daughter so beautifully, for finding it in your heart to let me into your lives now. We all deserve second chances, Sarah replied. Even billionaire CEOs who forget to call their college girlfriends. The gentle teasing, reminiscent of their younger selves, made them both smile. As James left, Emily noticed something had shifted between her parents. Not romance rekindled, but perhaps forgiveness taking root. Over the following months, James divided his time between Chicago and California, gradually resuming some of his responsibilities at Hawthorne Tech, while maintaining his commitment to his newly discovered family. Project Nexus launched successfully, with Emily's adaptive learning algorithm at its heart, bringing James's original vision to fruition through his daughter's innovation. On a crisp autumn evening, exactly 1 year after Emily had first packed her bags for Palo Alto, the three of them sat together in a quiet Chicago restaurant, celebrating both the project's success and their own remarkable journey. "I have an announcement," James said as they finished their meal. "The board approved it this morning." "Another acquisition?" Emily guessed. "Or are you finally taking that sabbatical you've been threatening?" "Better than that," James smiled. "We're establishing the Thompson Hawthorne Foundation for Educational Access, a nonprofit arm of the company dedicated to bringing Nexus technology to underserved communities worldwide." Sarah's eyes widened. "James, that's wonderful. And," he continued, looking at Emily, "we'd like you to lead it if you're interested. Your unique perspective, bridging technology and humanity, is exactly what the foundation needs." Emily sat back, stunned by the offer. "Lead it? But I've only been with the company a year." "A year in which you've proven yourself exceptional," James pointed out. "This isn't nepotism, Emily. It's recognition of your vision and abilities." "He's right," Sarah added. "You've earned this on your own merit." Emily looked between her parents, these two people who had lived separate lives for so long but now sat together in support of her future. "I'd be honored," she said finally. "It's everything I've wanted to accomplish." "There's one more thing," James said, his expression growing more serious. "The foundation will be headquartered here in Chicago." "Chicago?" Emily repeated, surprised. "Not Palo Alto?" "Your mother's medical team is here," James explained simply. "And I've spent enough time in both cities this year to know that I can effectively work from either. The company doesn't need me in the office every day anymore. That's what capable executives and video conferencing are for." The implication was clear. He was choosing to be near his family rather than his company headquarters, prioritizing relationships over convenience, reordering his life around what he now understood mattered most. "James," Sarah began, clearly moved by the gesture. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. "I've missed 24 years, Sarah. I don't intend to miss any more time than necessary." As they finished their dessert and prepared to leave, James looked at his daughter with tears in his eyes. "I spent my life building an empire," he said softly. "But this, you, our family, the foundation that will carry your values into the future. This is the only legacy that truly matters." Outside the restaurant, the three of them walked together through a nearby park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet as the sun set behind the Chicago skyline. They moved in comfortable silence, no longer strangers bound by secrets, but a family connected by truth, forgiveness, and the promise of a shared future. It wasn't the conventional family Emily had sometimes dreamed of as a child, nor the solitary success James had pursued for decades, nor the quiet life Sarah had built around her daughter and her teaching. It was something new, something that honored their past while creating space for what might yet be. As they walked side by side in the fading light, their shadows merged on the path before them, three separate journeys converging into one, proof that it's never too late for truth, for healing, for second chances. This story reminds us that our true legacy isn't measured in wealth or achievements, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. If you believe in the power of forgiveness and second chances, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another tale of transformation.